The wind came down from the Rockies with a bite that could freeze a man's breath mid-air, and Jacob Morrison stood at the edge of Thornfield, Wyoming, looking like he'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains themselves. He was 37 years old, broad as a barn door, with a beard that hadn't seen scissors in 2 years, and eyes the color of winter sky. The townspeople watched him from their windows as he led his pack mule down Main Street, the way they always watched strangers, but especially men like Jacob, men who looked like they belonged to the wilderness more than to civilization. Jacob had come to town for supplies, same as he did 4 times a year, no more, no less. He wasn't a man for company or conversation. He had his cabin 15 miles up in the high country, his trap lines, his solitude. That was enough. That had always been enough. But on this particular September morning in 1873, as he tied his mule outside Garrett's General Store, he heard something that made him pause. It was crying, not the ordinary fussing of a child, but the exhausted, hopeless sound of someone who had been crying for so long they'd almost forgotten why they started. The sound came from the alley beside the store. Jacob stood there for a moment, his hand still on the rope, his jaw working beneath his beard. He had learned long ago not to involve himself in town business. He had learned that people brought their own troubles on themselves more often than not, and a smart man kept to his own affairs. He turned toward the store entrance. The crying continued, joined now by a smaller voice, a child trying to comfort someone. "It's okay, Mama, don't cry. Please don't cry." Jacob closed his eyes. He muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse or might have been a prayer, and walked into the alley. What he found there would change everything. A woman sat on the ground with her back against the wall, her dress torn at the shoulder, her face buried in her hands. Around her clustered 4 children, the oldest couldn't have been more than 10, the youngest still in arms. They all had that hollow look that came from missing too many meals, and their clothes were patched and patched until there was more patch than original fabric. The woman looked up as Jacob's shadow fell across her, and he saw her flinch, saw her instinctively pull her children closer. She had been pretty once, he thought. She still was, in a worn, down, broken kind of way. Her eyes were green, red, rimmed from weeping, and her brown hair fell loose around her shoulders. "I don't want trouble," she said, her voice hoarse. "We'll move along. We were just resting." Jacob crouched down, slow and careful, the way he would approach a wounded animal. "What happened?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "What always happens. My husband died last winter. Pneumonia. The bank took our farm in June. I thought I could find work here, but—" She gestured at her children. "No one wants to hire a woman with 4 mouths to feed. The boarding house put us out this morning when I couldn't pay, and now what?" Her face crumpled. "Mrs. Henshaw at the church said she'd found homes for my children, separate homes. She said it was the Christian thing to do, to split them up so they wouldn't be such a burden on good families. She's coming for them at noon." The oldest child, a girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin, spoke up. "We won't go. We're staying together." "Hush, Sarah," the woman whispered, but there was no force behind it. Jacob looked at the children, Sarah, fierce and protective, a boy of about 8 with scared eyes, twin girls, maybe 5 years old, clutching each other's hands, and the baby, no more than a year, sleeping against his mother's chest despite the cold. He should walk away. He knew he should. He had his own life, his own solitude, his own carefully constructed walls between himself and the world that had hurt him so badly once before. Instead, he heard himself say, "What's your name?" "Catherine, Catherine Miller. These are Sarah, Thomas, Mary, Martha, and baby Samuel. Mrs. Miller." Jacob said slowly, "I have a proposition for you." She looked at him warily. She'd learned, he could see, to be suspicious of men's propositions. "I live up in the high country. I've got a cabin. It's rough, but it's sound, big enough for more than just me. I could use help with things, cooking, mending, keeping the place in order. In exchange, you and your children would have a roof, food, safety, through the winter at least. Come spring, if you want to leave, I'll bring you back to town with enough money to make a fresh start." Catherine stared at him. "Why would you do that? You don't know us." Jacob shrugged. "I've got no family. Umtum's accounts being credited. D splitting up, I don't HOLD with famil splitting up families. Planted SEEMS to me sake. That's about the GROUNDD. In eighths you could do to CHDN LDREN, who have already lost their father." "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I can't. I mean, people will talk. A woman and a man, not married, living under the same roof, then marry me." The words hung in the cold air between them. Jacob looked as surprised as Catherine that he'd said them. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, more firmly now. "Today, right now, we'll go see Pastor Williams, make it legal. You'll have my name, my protection. The children will have a father. It doesn't have to be more than that. Just a practical arrangement. You need help, I can provide it. Simple as that." Catherine's hands shook as she touched her sleeping baby's head. "You're serious? I don't say things I don't mean, but you don't love me. You don't even know me." Jacob's face was unreadable. "No, ma'am, I don't. But I know what it's like to be alone and desperate. And I know what it's like when people turn their backs because helping you is inconvenient. I know that much." Sarah, the oldest, tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mama, please. Don't let them take us away from each other." Catherine looked at her children, at this strange mountain man with his kind eyes and rough voice, at the street beyond the alley where Mrs. Henshaw would be coming soon to tear her family apart. "All right," she whispered, "all right, yes." The wedding took place an hour later in Pastor Williams's small office behind the church. Mrs. Williams stood as witness, her face tight with disapproval, but her silence purchased by her husband's gentle reminder that charity took many forms. Jacob spoke his vows in his rumbling voice, clear and steady. Catherine spoke hers with tears running down her face, the baby in her arms and her other children pressed around her skirts. When it was done, Jacob Morrison had a wife and 5 children, and Catherine Miller Morrison had a name that would protect her family from being scattered to the winds. The townspeople lined the street to watch them leave Jacob leading his mule, now loaded with enough additional supplies for 6 more mouths, Catherine walking beside him with Samuel on her hip, and the other 4 children following like ducklings. The whispers followed them too. Scandalous. What does he want with a ready-made family? Mark my words, this will end badly. Jacob heard them all. He kept walking. The journey to his cabin took the better part of 2 days, and Jacob watched his new family carefully. Sarah walked with grim determination, helping her younger siblings when they stumbled. Thomas tried to be brave, but couldn't quite hide his fear. The twins held hands and sang little songs to each other. Catherine carried the baby and said almost nothing, her face pale with exhaustion and uncertainty. The first night, they camped under the stars. Jacob built up the fire and heated beans and bacon in his pan. The children ate like they were starving, which they probably were. Catherine barely touched her food. After the children had fallen asleep, huddled together under the blanket Jacob had distributed, Catherine spoke quietly across the fire. "Why did you really do this?" Jacob poked at the coals with a stick. For a long moment he didn't answer. "Then I had a family once, a wife, a son. The fever took them both, 12 years ago. I came out here to get away from the memories, from the pity in people's eyes. I thought I wanted to be alone forever." He looked up at her. "Maybe I was wrong. I can't be her. Catherine said softly, "I can't replace what you lost. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you to let your children grow up together, under one roof. The rest," he shrugged. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." The cabin appeared on the second afternoon, nestled in a clearing with mountains rising behind it, and a stream running clear and cold nearby. It was bigger than Catherine had expected. 2 rooms, with a sleeping loft under the eaves, rough, hewn but solid, with a good stone fireplace and real glass in the windows. "The loft is for the children," Jacob said, lifting Sarah up to see. "There's room for all of them up there. You'll take the back room. I'll sleep out here by the fire." Over the following weeks, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Catherine cooked and cleaned and mended. Jacob hunted and trapped and chopped wood for the winter. The children, after their initial shyness, began to bloom in the safety and plenty of the mountain home. Thomas followed Jacob everywhere, learning to set snares and read animal tracks. The twins discovered that mountain meadows were full of flowers worth picking. Even baby Samuel seemed to thrive, growing plump on regular meals. Sarah was the hardest. She watched Jacob with suspicious eyes, always placing herself between him and her mother, as if ready to defend against some threat she couldn't name. Jacob was patient with her. He never pushed, never demanded trust, just went about his business with steady reliability. It was Sarah who fell through the ice. It happened in late November. The stream had frozen over, and the twins wanted to slide on it. Sarah went to check if it was safe, to protect her younger sisters the way she always did. Jacob heard the crack, then the splash, then the screaming. He ran faster than he'd ever run in his life, arriving in time to see Sarah's head go under the dark water. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself onto the ice, breaking through deliberately, grabbing the girl as the current tried to pull her away. The cold was like knives in his lungs, but he held her tight and fought his way back to the edge, where Catherine and Thomas pulled them both out. Catherine got them both back to the cabin, stripped off their frozen clothes, wrapped them in blankets by the fire. Sarah was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Her lips blew. Jacob's hands were too numb to work, so Catherine rubbed them between her own, breathing warm air on them, her face fierce with concentration. "You saved her," she whispered. "You could have died. She's my daughter now." Jacob said simply, "That's what fathers do." Sarah heard this. Through her shivering, through her fear, she heard it, and something in her face changed. Winter closed in hard and deep. Snow piled up to the windows. The world shrank to the circle of firelight and the sound of wind in the pines. They were isolated, cut off, just the 7 of them against the cold. And in that isolation, something grew. Jacob taught Thomas to read using his small collection of books. He carved dolls for the twins from scraps of wood. He made Sarah a sled, taking her sledding down the hills until she laughed, really laughed, for the first time since her father died. He rocked baby Samuel to sleep while Catherine finished her mending, singing old songs in his rough voice. Catherine watched all this, and her heart began to thaw like spring ice. She noticed how gentle his big hands were when he bandaged a scraped knee, how he never raised his voice, even when Thomas accidentally spilled a week's worth of beans, how he sat up all night when Martha had a fever, keeping cold cloths on her forehead, how he looked at her children not as burdens he'd taken on, but as treasures he'd been given. One night in December, as they sat by the fire after the children had gone to sleep, Catherine said, "I need to tell you something." Jacob looked up from the trap he was mending. "When you offered to help us, back in that alley, I thought you were either a fool or a scoundrel. I couldn't understand why anyone would take on a widow with 5 children unless they wanted you. Something unsavory in return." She paused. "I was wrong. You're the best man I've ever known." Jacob's face colored. "I'm just doing what's right." "No," Catherine said firmly. "You're doing more than that. You're giving my children what their own father couldn't: security, peace, happiness. You're giving them yourself every day without reservation, and I." She took a breath. "I want you to know that this doesn't have to be just an arrangement anymore. Not if you don't want it to be." He stared at her. "Catherine, I'm saying I've come to care for you, Jacob Morrison. And if you feel anything at all for me, I'm saying that this marriage could be real, not just on paper, but in every way." Jacob set down his trap. He crossed to where she sat, knelt in front of her, and took her hands in his. "I've been half in love with you since the day I watched you put your children before everything else, including your pride. I've been all the way in love with you since I saw you rock Samuel to sleep while singing to him in that voice of yours, but I didn't think. I didn't dare hope." She kissed him then, gentle and tentative, and he kissed her back with 12 years of loneliness breaking open inside him like a dam. Spring came eventually, as it always does. The snow melted, the streams ran high, and the world turned green again. Jacob took his furs to town to sell, and this time he took his whole family with him. The townspeople stared, of course. They always would. But this time they saw something different. They saw Sarah riding on Jacob's shoulders, chattering about a deer she'd seen. They saw Thomas walking proud beside his new father, wearing a knife Jacob had made him. They saw the twins' flower crowns and Catherine's smile, and the baby reaching for Jacob's beard with happy crows of laughter. They saw a family. Mrs. Henshaw approached them outside the general store, her face pinched. "Mrs. Morrison, I trust you know you made quite a spectacle last fall, running off with a stranger like that." Catherine looked at the woman who had wanted to tear her children apart in the name of Christian charity. Then she looked at Jacob, who had put them back together in the name of simple human decency. "Yes, ma'am," she said clearly. "And I'd do it again in a heartbeat." That night, camped again under the stars on their way home, with the children asleep and the fire burning low, Jacob pulled Catherine close. "No regrets?" he asked. She thought about the farm she'd lost, the life she'd planned, the future she'd thought she'd have. She thought about the alley, the desperation, the moment this rough mountain man had offered her salvation without asking for anything in return. "Not a single one," she said. "You took all of us, me and every one of my children. You took us broken and afraid, and you made us whole again. How could I regret that?" "I got the better end of this deal," Jacob said softly. "I was just existing up in those mountains. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me a family. You gave me everything." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Around them, the wilderness stretched vast and indifferent. But here, in this small circle of firelight, there was warmth and love and the sound of children breathing safely in their sleep. Jacob Morrison had gone to town for supplies and come home with a family. The mountain man's choice had shocked the town, and perhaps it should have. Love itself was shocking. The way it appeared when you least expected it. The way it demanded you become more than you thought you could be. The way it healed wounds you didn't even know you carried. Years later, when people asked Jacob why he'd done it, why he'd taken on a widow and 5 children without a second thought, he would smile beneath his beard and say simply, "Because they needed someone, and I needed them." Sometimes the math is just that simple. But Catherine knew better. She knew it wasn't simple at all. It was courage and kindness and the willingness to let your carefully built walls come down. It was choosing connection over isolation, family over solitude, love over fear. It was, in the end, everything that mattered. And on quiet nights, when the children were grown and gone to families of their own, when it was just the 2 of them again by the fire, Jacob would take Catherine's hand, and they would sit in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of ways, and built something beautiful from desperation and hope. The mountain man's choice had shocked the town, but it had saved them all.